One sentence from Judge Caprio changed everything this law student thought he knew. What you're about to witness isn't just a courtroom exchange. It's a masterclass in how true authority responds when challenged by arrogance. And the student's reaction? Let's just say he'll never make this mistake again. Your Honor, with all due respect, I believe you're misinterpreting the statute. The words hung in the courtroom air like a challenge thrown down before a king. 24-year-old Marcus Thompson, third-year Harvard law student, stood at the defendant's podium with the kind of confidence that only comes from never being truly tested. His designer suit, perfectly groomed appearance, and practiced courtroom voice all screamed privilege and presumption. Judge Frank Caprio looked up slowly from the case file, his weathered hands folding deliberately on the bench. The 83-year-old veteran of Providence Municipal Court had seen thousands of defendants, but something about this young man's tone made him pause. This wasn't respect. This was challenge. Excuse me? Judge Caprio's voice carried the weight of 4 decades on the bench. But what Marcus didn't know was that he had just made the biggest mistake of his legal career in front of the most respected judge in America. You see, Marcus Thompson wasn't supposed to be in Providence Municipal Court that day. He was supposed to be observing a tax law seminar at Harvard. But a reckless night of partying had led to a DUI arrest, and his father's connections had somehow landed him in front of Judge Caprio for what should have been a routine hearing. Marcus figured he could talk his way out of it. After all, he was Harvard Law. He was destined for the Supreme Court. What could some local municipal judge possibly teach him? Subscribe now and hit that notification bell because what happens next will blow your mind. This law student thought he was the smartest person in the room. He was about to learn otherwise. But let's rewind to understand how we got here. 3 days earlier, Marcus had been celebrating his acceptance into Harvard Law Review with his study group at an upscale Boston bar. The celebration had turned into a competition to see who could sound the most sophisticated about constitutional law. Marcus, emboldened by expensive whiskey and his own ego, had decided to drive back to campus to retrieve some notes he wanted to show off. The Massachusetts State Police had other plans. Now, standing in a Providence courtroom that felt beneath his station, Marcus was looking at Judge Frank Caprio, the man whose videos had made him famous nationwide for his compassion and wisdom. But Marcus didn't see compassion. He saw an opportunity to demonstrate his superior legal knowledge to what he assumed was a small-town judge who'd be impressed by Harvard credentials. The case seemed simple enough. DUI, first offense, clean record. In Marcus's mind, this was a formality. He'd heard Judge Caprio was known for leniency. What he hadn't heard was that the judge was also known for something else, an ability to see through pretense that bordered on the supernatural. Mr. Thompson, Judge Caprio began, reviewing the file. I see you're a law student at Harvard. Yes, Your Honor. 3rd year. I'm on law review. Marcus's chest puffed slightly with pride. Impressive. The judge's tone was neutral, but something flickered behind his eyes. And I suppose that makes you something of an expert on the law. Marcus missed the subtle warning in the judge's voice. Well, I wouldn't say expert, Your Honor, but I do have a strong foundation in jurisprudence and constitutional interpretation. A few people in the courtroom gallery shifted uncomfortably. The court reporter kept typing, but her eyebrows raised slightly. The bailiff, who had worked with Judge Caprio for 15 years, recognized the tone. Something was building. Judge Caprio nodded slowly. I see. Well then, perhaps you can help me understand something, Mr. Thompson. You were arrested for driving under the influence with a blood alcohol content of 0.12. The legal limit in Massachusetts is 0.08. Do you dispute these facts? No, Your Honor, but, this was Marcus's moment. He'd prepared for this. Your Honor, I believe there are several constitutional issues with the traffic stop that warrant dismissal. The Fourth Amendment protections against unreasonable search and seizure, the potential for procedural violations in the administration of the breathalyzer test, and frankly, I question whether this court has proper jurisdiction given that the arrest occurred in Massachusetts. The courtroom fell silent. Marcus smiled slightly, pleased with his legal argument. He'd just demonstrated superior knowledge to a local judge who probably dealt with parking tickets and small claims disputes. Judge Caprio leaned back in his chair, studying the young man before him. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, almost grandfatherly. Mr. Thompson, in your extensive study of the law at Harvard, have you ever come across the concept of venue shopping? Marcus blinked. Your Honor, venue shopping, the practice of filing legal proceedings in a jurisdiction believed to provide the most favorable outcome. Are you familiar with this concept? Yes, Your Honor, but I don't see how that applies. Don't you? Judge Caprio's voice sharpened just slightly. Because what you've just done is attempt to lecture me on jurisdiction while standing in a Rhode Island courtroom for a Massachusetts arrest. You see, Mr. Thompson, your Massachusetts license was suspended pending this hearing. You drove to Rhode Island on a suspended license to appear before me. That's a separate violation of Rhode Island motor vehicle laws, which absolutely gives me jurisdiction. The color drained from Marcus's face. He hadn't considered that driving to Rhode Island on a suspended license created a new violation. But Judge Caprio wasn't finished. Furthermore, your attempt to question the constitutionality of a breathalyzer test that you admitted was accurate demonstrates something troubling, Mr. Thompson. You're not seeking justice. You're seeking to escape consequences through technicalities. Marcus's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. What happened next shocked everyone in the courtroom, including the seasoned court officers who thought they'd seen everything. Judge Caprio stood up slowly, his black robes making him seem even more imposing despite his modest height. When he spoke, his voice carried the authority of someone who had dedicated his life to justice, not just law. Mr. Thompson, let me share something with you that they apparently don't teach at Harvard Law. The law is not a game. It's not a puzzle for clever people to solve so they can avoid responsibility. The law exists to protect society, to ensure fairness, and to hold people accountable for their actions. Marcus tried to interrupt. Your Honor, you were simply demonstrating that you've learned how to manipulate legal language without understanding the spirit of justice behind it. Judge Caprio's voice rose slightly, not in anger, but in passion. You stand before me having endangered lives by driving drunk, and your first instinct isn't remorse or responsibility. It's to find a loophole. The judge paused, letting his words sink in. Around the courtroom, people were leaning forward. This wasn't typical Judge Caprio. This was something more intense, more personal. You mentioned constitutional interpretation, Mr. Thompson. Are you familiar with the preamble to the Constitution? Marcus nodded weakly. Yes, Your Honor. Recite it. Your Honor. Recite the preamble to the Constitution that you claim to understand so well. Marcus's face went red. We the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility. Stop. Judge Caprio's voice cut through the recitation. Establish justice. Do you know what that means, Mr. Thompson? Your Honor, It means creating a system where actions have consequences, where people are held accountable for their choices, where the law serves the people, not the other way around. Judge Caprio walked around to the front of his bench, standing directly in front of Marcus. The physical distance between them had closed, but the gap in wisdom and experience had never been more apparent. You want to talk about the Fourth Amendment? Fine. The Fourth Amendment protects against unreasonable searches. There was nothing unreasonable about stopping a driver who was swerving across lanes. You want to talk about procedural violations? The procedure was followed perfectly, you were read your rights, the breathalyzer was administered properly, and you had every opportunity to request an attorney. Marcus looked around the courtroom desperately, as if searching for support that wasn't coming. But here's what really troubles me, Mr. Thompson, Judge Caprio continued. You're not upset about constitutional violations. You're upset about getting caught. And that tells me everything I need to know about what kind of lawyer you're going to become. Comment below and tell us what you think Judge Caprio should do with this arrogant student. Subscribe to see more moments where real authority meets fake intelligence. The judge returned to his seat, but his eyes never left Marcus. Mr. Thompson, I've been on this bench for 38 years. I've seen every type of defendant you can imagine. The remorseful, the defiant, the confused, the angry. But you represent something particularly dangerous, educated arrogance without wisdom. Marcus finally found his voice, though it was much smaller than before. Your Honor, I apologize if I seemed disrespectful. That wasn't my intention. Wasn't it? Judge Caprio's eyebrows raised. You walked into my courtroom assuming that your Harvard education made you superior to this process. You attempted to use legal jargon to intimidate what you assumed was a simple municipal judge. You showed no remorse for endangering lives, only concern for avoiding consequences. The judge pulled out a thick file from beneath his papers. Mr. Thompson, since you're so interested in my qualifications to interpret the law, let me share something with you. He opened the file. Bachelor's degree from Providence College, 1963. Law degree from Suffolk University, 1967. Admitted to the Rhode Island Bar, 1967. Municipal Court judge since 1985. But here's what might interest you more. I've overseen more than 300,000 cases in my career. 300,000, Mr. Thompson. How many cases have you handled? Marcus's mouth moved, but no sound came out. I've seen drunk drivers who killed families, and I've seen drunk drivers who learned from their mistakes and became advocates for safety. I've seen young lawyers who understood that the law is about service, and I've seen others who thought it was about showing off their intelligence. Judge Caprio closed the file. The question is, which type are you going to be? For the first time since entering the courtroom, Marcus looked genuinely uncertain. The confident law student who had walked in ready to lecture a local judge was gone, replaced by a young man who was beginning to understand that intelligence without wisdom is just dangerous ignorance. Your Honor, Marcus said quietly, I think I misunderstood what this hearing was about. Did you? Judge Caprio's voice softened slightly, but his intensity remained. What did you think it was about? I thought it was about winning, about proving I was smart enough to beat the system. And now, Marcus looked around the courtroom, seeing it differently than when he'd first entered. Now I think it's about taking responsibility for what I did. Judge Caprio nodded slowly. That's a start, Mr. Thompson. But it's only a start. The judge reached for his gavel, then paused. Mr. Thompson, you mentioned that you're on Harvard Law Review. Yes, Your Honor. That's quite an achievement. I'm sure your parents are proud. Marcus nodded, unsure where this was going. Tell me about your article. What are you writing about? Constitutional protections in criminal procedure, Your Honor. Judge Caprio almost smiled. Of course you are. And what's your thesis? Marcus shifted uncomfortably. That defendants' rights are often violated by procedural shortcuts taken by overwhelmed courts. Interesting theory. Based on how much courtroom experience? Your Honor, how many trials have you observed? How many defendants have you interviewed? How many judges have you shadowed to understand the reality of what we do here? Marcus's silence answered the question. So you're writing about criminal procedure without understanding how it actually works. You're theorizing about defendants' rights without talking to defendants. You're critiquing judges without spending time in courtrooms. Judge Caprio stood again, and his voice took on the tone of a teacher rather than a disciplinarian. Mr. Thompson, let me tell you about defendants' rights. Real defendants' rights, not theoretical ones. Every person who stands where you're standing has the right to be treated with dignity. They have the right to have their case heard fairly. They have the right to expect that the judge understands both the law and the human condition. He gestured toward the gallery, where several other defendants waited their turn. These people aren't legal puzzles to be solved. They're human beings who made mistakes, just like you did. Some of them are here for the 5th time because they haven't learned from their mistakes. Others are here for the first time and terrified about what it means for their future. Marcus looked back at the other defendants, seeing them as individuals rather than just part of the courtroom scenery. But you know what they all have in common, Mr. Thompson? They all deserve better than a lawyer who sees them as intellectual exercises rather than people who need help. Judge Caprio sat back down, his voice becoming more personal. I'm going to tell you something that might shock you. I hope you become a great lawyer. I really do. But not the kind of lawyer you were planning to be when you walked in here. What kind was I planning to be, Your Honor? The kind who uses the law to serve yourself instead of using yourself to serve the law. The courtroom was completely silent. Even the court reporter had stopped typing, caught up in the unexpected lesson being delivered. Mr. Thompson, do you know why I became a judge? Marcus shook his head. Because I wanted to make sure that every person who came before me got the same quality of justice, regardless of whether they could afford a Harvard-educated lawyer or had to use a public defender fresh out of law school. Judge Caprio opened Marcus's file again. You're here for driving under the influence. First offense, no accidents, no injuries. Under normal circumstances, this would be a straightforward case. License suspension, fine, alcohol education program, community service. Marcus nodded, waiting for the ruling. But these aren't normal circumstances, are they, Mr. Thompson? Your Honor, you're not just a defendant, you're a future lawyer. And that means you have a responsibility that goes beyond just accepting whatever punishment I give you. Judge Caprio leaned forward. So here's what's going to happen. Yes, you'll serve the standard penalties. But you're also going to spend 100 hours observing cases in this courtroom. Marcus's eyes widened. Your Honor, 100 hours, Mr. Thompson. You're going to sit in that gallery and watch real defendants with real problems. You're going to see how the law actually works when it's applied with both justice and compassion. You're going to learn what you can't learn in any classroom. The judge continued. And at the end of those 100 hours, you're going to write a new law review article. Not about constitutional procedure, but about what you learned about justice by watching it happen. Marcus stared at the judge, speechless. Do you accept these conditions, Mr. Thompson? Marcus hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Yes, Your Honor. Good. Because there's one more thing. Judge Caprio's voice became very quiet, forcing everyone in the courtroom to lean in to hear him. Mr. Thompson, you came into my courtroom thinking you were smarter than everyone here. You're not. You're just educated. And there's a big difference. The judge picked up his gavel. Smart is knowing the law. Wise is knowing when and how to apply it. Educated is having read about justice. Experienced is having seen it happen, both when it succeeds and when it fails. He paused, looking directly at Marcus. I hope that by the time you finish your 100 hours here, you'll begin to understand the difference between being educated and being wise. Because the legal profession doesn't need more educated lawyers. It needs more wise ones. If this moment gave you chills, smash that subscribe button and share this video. Judge Caprio is about to deliver a final lesson that will change how you think about authority forever. Judge Caprio raised his gavel, then stopped one more time. Mr. Thompson, one final question. When you become a lawyer, and I believe you will become a good one, eventually, what kind of clients do you want to serve? Marcus thought for a moment. I assumed I'd work at a corporate firm. Big cases, important clients. Important clients, Judge Caprio repeated. Define important. Well, large corporations, government agencies, high-profile individuals. I see. And what about the single mother who can't afford childcare while she comes to court for a traffic ticket? Is she important? Marcus didn't answer. What about the elderly man who doesn't understand why his insurance claim was denied? The small business owner who's being sued by a corporation with unlimited legal resources? The immigrant who needs help understanding her rights? Are they important? Marcus looked down at his hands. I never really thought about it that way. Of course you didn't. Because Harvard Law Review doesn't write articles about helping people who can't pay Harvard Law Review prices. Judge Caprio set down his gavel without using it. Mr. Thompson, here's your real sentence. You're going to spend those 100 hours in this courtroom, yes. But you're also going to spend 50 hours working with the public defender's office. Pro bono. No pay, no credit, no resume building. Just helping people who need help. Marcus's head snapped up. Your Honor, my course load will have to be adjusted, because this is more important than any class you're taking. The judge stood for the final time. Mr. Thompson, you challenged my authority today. You questioned my understanding of the law. You assumed that your education made you superior to this process and these people. Judge Caprio walked around his bench one last time, standing directly in front of the young law student. But authority isn't about being the smartest person in the room. It's about serving something bigger than yourself. The law isn't about winning arguments. It's about protecting people and ensuring fairness. He extended his hand to Marcus, who shook it hesitantly. I hope that when you come back here in 6 months to report on your community service and your observations, you'll understand that true authority comes not from what you know, but from how you use what you know to help others. Judge Caprio returned to his bench and picked up his gavel. Court will recess for lunch. Mr. Thompson, please see the clerk to arrange your schedule. And Mr. Thompson, yes, Your Honor? Welcome to the real practice of law. As the gavel came down, Marcus Thompson stood in the empty courtroom, understanding for the first time that he had just received the most valuable education of his life. He had come to challenge Judge Caprio's authority and had instead discovered what true authority really meant. The law student who had walked into the courtroom that morning was gone. In his place stood a young man who was finally ready to learn not just about the law, but about justice. And that made all the difference.